stool, and let me pour you a drink. And let's talk a little noir at the bar.
Thanks for joining us today for another episode of Noir at the Bar, where you get to hear some of your favorite authors reading from their books and short stories. Now, this season, our guest readers are authors that are going to be attending the Left Coast Crime in Seattle, April 11th to 14th. So not only do you get to hear them on the show here, you can go visit them, meet them, and maybe get a book signed. First author up reading is Judy Penz Sheluk, and she's reading from her Marketville Mysteries, and the book is called Skeletons in the Attic. So set us up and let us know what you're going to talk about, Judy.
All right. So the book I'm reading from today is Skeletons in the Attic. Hopefully you can see that. And I'm going to take you to one of the opening scenes in Chapter 1. Right now we're joining Leith Hampton, who is a lawyer, and Calamity, Callie Barnstable, who is the book's narrator and protagonist. And they're in the boardroom of Hampton and Associates. Some of the text has been abridged in the interest of time. Leith Hampton opened a drawer and removed a manila file folder along with a thin document bound in pale blue cardboard. The words Last Will and Testament of James David Barnstable etched in black on the cover. Let's go into the boardroom, he said. We won't be disturbed there. I followed Leith into a long, windowless room with a mahogany table surrounded by several black leather swivel chairs. I selected a seat across from him and waited. Leith placed the will in front of him, moving an invisible crease with a well-manicured hand, the nails showing evidence of a vigorous buffing. I wondered what kind of man went in for a mani-pedi. I was surmising on the pedi, and decided it was the kind of man who billed his services out for $500 an hour. Unlike his office, which had a desk stacked high with paperwork, the boardroom was devoid of clutter or ornamentation. The sole exception was a framed photograph of an attractive blue-eyed blonde, mid to late 20s. She had her arms wrapped possessively around two fair-haired children, ages about 3 and 5. Mrs. Leith Hampton the fourth, I assumed, or possibly the fifth. I'd lost count, not that it mattered. My business here had nothing to do with Hampton's latest trophy wife or their gap-toothed offspring. I was here for the reading of my father's last will and testament, an event I would have been far happier not attending for a good many years to come. Unfortunately, a faulty safety harness hadn't stopped his fall from the 30th floor of a condo under construction. The fact that a criminal defense attorney of Leith's reputation had drawn up the will was an indication of just how long the two men had been friends. Leith cleared his throat and stared at me with his intense blue eyes. Are you sure you're ready, Calamity? I know how close you were to your father. I flinched at the Calamity. Folks called me Callie, or they didn't call me at all. Only my dad had been allowed to call me Calamity, and even then only when he was seriously annoyed with me, and never in public. It was a deal we'd made back in elementary school. Kids can be cruel enough without the added incentive of a name like Calamity. As for being ready, I'd been ready since I got the call telling me my father had been involved in an unfortunate occupational accident. That's how the detached voice on the other end of the phone had put it. An unfortunate occupational accident. I knew at some point I'd have to face the fact that my dad wasn't coming back, that we'd never again argue over politics or share a laugh while watching an episode of The Big Bang Theory. Knew that one day I'd sit down and have a good long cry, but right now wasn't the time, and this certainly wasn't the place. I'd long ago learned to store my feelings into carefully constructed compartments. I leveled Leith with a dry-eyed stare and nodded. I'm ready. Leith opened the file and began to read. I, James David Barnstable, hereby declare that this is my last will and testament, and that I hereby revoke, blah, 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 blah. I bequeath the whole of my estate, property, and effects to my daughter Calamity Doris Barnstable. I nodded and tuned out the monotony of the will's legalese. I had expected no more and no less. I was the only child of two only children, and my mother had long ago left my dad and me to fend for ourselves. Not that the whole of his estate would amount to much. Some well-worn furniture, a few mismatched dishes, a small stack of dog-eared paperbacks. There is one provision, Lee said, dragging me out of my reverie. Your father wants you to move into the house in Marketville. I sat up straighter and looked Leith in the eye. Clearly I'd missed something important when I'd zoned out with the blah, blah, blah. What house in Marketville? Leith let out a theatrical courtroom sigh, well practiced but over the top for his audience of one. You haven't really been listening, have you, Calamity? I was forced to admit I had not, although now he had my undivided attention. Marketville was a community about an hour north of Toronto. The sort of town where families with 2 kids, a collie, and a cat moved to looking for a bigger house, a better school, and soccer fields. It didn't sound much like me or my father. You're saying my father owned a house in Marketville? I don't understand. Why didn't he live there? Leith shrugged. It seems he couldn't bear to part with it and he couldn't stand living in it. He's been renting it out since 1986. The year my mother had left, I'd been 6. I tried to remember a house in Marketville. Nothing came to mind. Even my memories of my mother were vague. The house has gone through some hard times, what with tenants coming and going over the years, Leith continued. I've done my best to manage the property, but not living nearby. He colored slightly. I glanced at the photo of his vibrant young family and suspected such treasures did not come cheap. There was probably alimony for the other trophy wives as well. I decided to let it go. My father had trusted him. That had to be enough. You said he wanted me to move into the house. When was he going to tell me? Well, I think the initial plan was that your father was going to move back in there, but of course now that he's dead, you think he wanted me to move there? Actually, it's more than wanted, Calamity. It's provision of the will that you move into 16 Snack Dragon Circle for a period of 1 year. After that, you are free to do what you wish. Go back to renting it, continue to live there, or sell it. And if I decide to sell it, homes in that area of Marketville typically sell quickly and for a decent price. You'd have to put in some elbow grease, but your father left you some money for renovations. He had money set aside, enough for renovations. I thought about a shabby townhouse, the threadbare carpets, the flannel sheet covering holes in the fabric of the ancient olive green brocade sofa. I always thought my dad was frugal because he had to be. It never occurred to me he was squirreling away money to fix up a house I didn't even know existed. Leith nodded. Enough for you to take a year off work and fulfill the other requirement. Leaving my call center job at the bank would definitely not be a hardship. And my month-to-month lease would be easy enough to break. What's the other requirement? Leith leaned back in his chair and let out another one of his theatrical sighs. I got the impression he didn't really approve of the condition. Your father wants you to find out who murdered your mother, and he believes the clues may be hidden in the Marketville house. And that's my story.
Thank you very much, Judy. That was excellent. Thank you. And now we'll go down to John. What's going on your end of the bar?
Hey, this is Winona Kent. She is reading from Notes on a Missing G-String, which is the winner for the best title.
So I'll just set this up. This is from Notes on a Missing G-String. It's book 2 of my Jason Davey mystery series. Jason's a professional musician and an amateur sleuth. And in this book, he's investigating the theft of some money from a stripper's locker. And he's run up against the Soho crime lord, Arthur Brasky. And in order to get information out of Brasky, Jason's been forced into doing a fire walk, which Brasky has sponsored. He's really scared, and to make matters worse, Brasky's arranged for a traffic accident to deliberately delay Jason's arrival. So he's missed the introductory safety and prep talk that precedes all firewalk events. So one further point, Jason is obviously a guy, and this is written in the first person, so you'll have to imagine I'm a guy, and I'm also English. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around. It was Arthur Brasky. "You have arrived, then," he said, rather more jovially than I would have thought the situation warranted. "Yes, I'm sorry," I said. "It seems because I've missed the warm-up chat, I won't be allowed to participate." "Nonsense," Arthur Brasky pronounced, clapping his hand on my shoulder and dragging me across to the organizer, a guy named Grundig. "A late addition. He's walking." A moment of doubt flashed across the guy's face. "But we have strict rules, Mr. Brasky." "I know the rules. I'll assume the responsibility should he come to harm." I wasn't filled with any great sense of relief. I was most definitely going to come to harm. Having Arthur Brasky step in to accept the blame for it wasn't going to soothe the scalding burns on the soles of my feet. But I'd advise you to agree, Mr. Grundig, unless you consider your daytime employment a less than necessary fixture in your life. Mr. Grundig opened his mouth and closed it again, obviously thinking the better of what he was tempted to say. Come with me, he said instead, taking my arm. A lot of people had promised they were going to be there to cheer me on. I didn't see any of them. Just watch the others, Mr. Grundig advised. Do what they do. Don't think about it. Try to think past it to the end. Walk quickly, but don't run. Don't stop for anything. Remember the Leidenfrost effect. He was going to leave me there, abandon me to the fire. He was going to walk away. Wait, I shouted. What's the Leidenfrost effect? A woman who was standing in last in line turned to me and said, Goodness, weren't you paying attention earlier? When the embers are at 700 degrees Fahrenheit, the water on the soles of our feet will produce a protective cushion that stops the skin from burning. And that's proven, is it? I said skeptically. Of course it is. Stop being silly. You'll frighten the others. I couldn't see how any of the others could possibly be more terrified than me. To make matters worse, Arthur Brasky was standing front and center behind the ropes, grinning at me like a bloody Cheshire cat. The reason I could see him in the dark was because there were 4 tubs filled with blazing logs, one at each corner of the fire pit, which I judged was about 10 feet long and 3 feet wide. It was shimmering orange and red and looked extremely hot. It felt extremely hot, too. The warmth was radiating out, cloaking us as we stood in the lineup, waiting to prove our mettle or have it melted. Are we ready, ladies and gentlemen? It was a flashy showman sort of guy, a natural with a mic. I found out later his name was Pete Barnum. I'm not joking. He checked the fire pit with a thermometer on the end of a long wand, then, satisfied it was at just the right temperature for a perfectly seared top sirloin, made the announcement, Shoes and socks off, if you please. Most of the walkers were already in flip-flops. A few, like me, were in trainers. I couldn't sit down on the grass as it was soaking wet, and I really wasn't keen to make my jeans look as if I peed myself. I got my trainers and socks off, balancing on one foot at a time, and I was actually rather pleased to be standing on sopping grass, because I reckoned that meant I'd be giving the famous Leidenfrost effect a fighting chance. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you your fire master, Braden. Braden was as flashy as Pete Barnum and was dressed in a spangly white jumpsuit, the sort of thing Elvis would have worn while he belted out Viva Las Vegas. I had to hand it to Brasky. He knew how to deliver a show. Braden quickly rolled up his trouser legs and made sure they were going to stay up by applying a pair of diamond-studded bicycle clips just below his knees. Our brave Braden is going to be the very first to go, just to prove there's nothing to fear. Braden, if you please. Braden bowed to us, then trod onto the burning embers and walked quickly and efficiently all the way to the end, where he stepped off, planted his feet on the wet grass, and took another bow to enthusiastic applause. Next in line is... Pete paused to ask the woman her name. Alma, she shouted, raising her hands over her head while her friends and family cheered from the sidelines. Are you ready, Alma? I'm ready. Off you go then. With an enormous grin on her face, Alma purposely walked from one end to the other. She landed on the wet grass, shuffled her feet as if she was cleaning them off, then scooted around to where I was standing and rejoined the line. I'm going again, she shouted, high on her success. I was no longer the last participant. Brasky was determined to make sure I went through with it. He was impaling me with his piercing gaze. I tried to ignore him, focusing instead on everyone else as they took their turns, trying to concentrate on what they were doing, how quickly they were walking, how honest they were at the end when they jubilantly claimed there was nothing to it and, with adrenaline-fueled exhilaration, cheered their fellow walkers on. I've suffered burns. I know what it feels like. I have scars, though you can't see them unless I take off my clothes. There were 12 people ahead of me, and then 8, and then 2. The assembled guests had been cheering non-stop, and at the end of each walk, they'd erupted into appreciative whoops and claps. It was my turn. You ready, mate? What's your name? Jason, I said. Ready to go, Jason? I wanted to say no. I wanted to turn around and run as far away from the fire as I could get. I could feel the grass wet and cold under my feet as I forced myself to ignore my galloping heart and pay attention instead to the science. Hang on, Jason. We just need to rake the fire. I closed my eyes. I couldn't wait. It was now or never. Balling my fists, I opened my eyes and started to walk, just as Braden finished redistributing the hot embers. And it's Jason's turn. Let's hear it for Jason. My heart was racing. I barely heard the cheering. I could feel the heat on either side of me where the burning would have been stacked higher. Science, I thought. Water, feet, focus. I was halfway there. I could feel a tingling on my soles, but it wasn't burning. It was like walking on the hot sand at 7 Mile Beach in Grand Cayman. Screw you, Arthur Baskey, I thought, pumping my arms the way I'd seen the others do it. Screw you, fire. This time you won't have your way. I was breathing deeply by the time I stepped off the burning path and onto the soothing wet grass. The onlookers on the other side of the rope had been encouraging me the whole way, but it was only at the end when I actually heard them shouting my name and sending me congratulatory cheers. Exhilarated, heart pumping, I turned to Arthur Baskey and gave him my best screw you too look before I strode off the grass and away from the fire pit.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you being on and doing reading today. And
We interrupt our programming. This is a national emergency. Important details will follow.
Are you prepared? Legacy Food Storage. The best way to protect your family is by being prepared. Go now to legacyfoodstorage.com. Use coupon code HOM15 now for 15% off. Quick, go!
Morning face. You get it when you don't sleep well. This is what happened to Linda.
Morning, guys.
Good morning. Ah! What is that thing?
It's me, Linda.
Oh my God, it talks! Run!
No, it's me, Linda from HR.
It looks hungry! Save the children! Save them! Stay back, I've got mace!
Ow, that went in my eyes.
Quit moving!
It's called beauty sleep for a reason. And there's never been a better time to get some.
Get 20% off IKEA Sultan mattresses. IKEA, love your home.
Look, we know that boy's gonna ask again, so let's be ready.
Fine, I'll be him. You ready?
Ready.
Mom, could you hook me up with a GoPhone?
You'll run up the bill, son.
Yo, that's whack, Moms. GoPhone is totally different.
What? It'll only cost me an arm?
Chillax. It has unlimited talk and text.
Seriously?
Word.
Okay, we'll get a GoPhone.
Really? Really? That is the bomb.
Do you even know what the bomb means?
Yes. No.
GoPhone, only from AT&T. With unlimited talk to 65 million wireless AT&T customers, and now unlimited text to anyone on any network. AT&T, your world delivered.
If you're a fan of stories that make you afraid to turn the lights off at night, then you will love Moonless Nocturne, Tales of Dark Fantasy and Horror. From attorney, former Air Force officer, special agent for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and Bram Stoker award-winning author, Hank Schwabel. Moonless Nocturne is a chilling set of 10 tales that offers an exquisite and impressive showcase of the author's talents that are sure to entertain and intrigue readers who love a good thrill. With an introduction by the iconic F. Paul Wilson, Moonless Nocturne is a gourmet platter of both red meat and rare delicacies, not only for aficionados of horror, mystery, thrillers, and suspense, but any connoisseurs of fantastic fiction. It's inventive and original. This collection has already been optioned for television and film by Lone Tree Entertainment and is certain to appeal to fans of King, Barker, Matheson, and Jackson. It's not the dark that should scare you, it's all the things that lurk there. Order your copy right now on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Moonless Nocturne, Tales of Dark Fantasy and Horror, from author Hank Schwabel.
Now back to the show.
next up we have Iona Whishaw. So now you're going to be reading from To Track a Traitor. Now this is a historical mystery. So set it up and let us know what you're going to be reading here.
Okay, so this scene takes place in one of the scariest places I've ever been. If you move west by foot out of the seaside town of Eastbourne in the south of England, you go up a very, very steep climb through a wood and then continuing up in sort of bare countryside. until you get to the very top of the cliff, and you're in a place called Beachy Head. There you'll find yourself on the edge of the most terrifying cliff, Chalk Cliff, looking out at France across the water, and right under your feet, a 500-foot drop to the beach below. In this particular section of the reading, Elaine Winslow, who's my main character, her sister has been spying during the war, and she's really anxious to get out of the whole business. But her lover, who was the man who used to handle her, wants her to come away with him, but she has terrible news for him. She now knows something that no one else does, that she's found treachery high up in the very heart of the British intelligence system, and she suspects only the two of them will be able to bring him down. So it's May 10th, 1948. There was a bare sliver of a moon, but its faint efforts could not penetrate the wood, and Diana found herself having to peer at the ground to follow the path steeply upward. He told her to bring a torch, but not to use it unless absolutely necessary, and a change of clothes. She stopped, cursing at the steep climb up from the edge of town. He was supposed to have picked up her suitcase, but now she wondered if he'd been able to. She hadn't packed much, but the bag gained weight with the steepness of the climb. During the day, the path would likely be full of dog walkers and ramblers, but tonight it had the power of the darkness that she used to fear so much as a child in the woods near their house. She could hear her own breath coming heavily, and she stopped to take off her heavy cardigan and tie it around her waist under her leather shoulder bag. She had to decide. He'd asked her to leave with him. He must have set something up, perhaps a boat pickup somewhere below in the darkness. Now, with her satchel of clothes stumbling about in the dark, she wondered if she would come to regret this decision. She wanted so badly to be finished with the whole thing, to retire to private life, whatever that proved to be. But she loved him, and she knew about Fairfax. Something would have to be done about that. Only she and Alex would probably be able to come up with a plan. One thing was certain. She had to be as far away as possible. Fairfax would realize sooner or later that she'd been into his secret cubbyhole and taken something. She hadn't been sure at first about leaving with Alex, but it offered the chance to get far away where there would be time to work through what ought to be done. She could just make out the end of the dense wood up ahead and picked up speed. A root caught her foot, and she fell heavily, her torch flying out of her hand. She could feel that she'd skinned her hands, and she felt a burst of anger. Anger about being here alone in the dark, when she could have been in Scotland with her grandparents fussing over her. Anger that Alex still had the kind of hold on her that would bring her out in the middle of nowhere to crash around in the dark. She lay still for a moment, but hearing nothing but her own breathing, she got up, dusted off her trousers, and began to look for the torch. She found it 4 feet away, where it had rolled down the slight slope and had come to rest against a tree. She tested it and was relieved it worked. She hoisted the bag back onto her shoulder and scanned a short section of the path directly in front of her with the torch, and then turned it off. Her watch with its phosphorescent numbers told her she was already late, so she picked up her pace again. If she thought the opening of the wood meant she was close to her goal, she was disappointed. The terrain opened up after the wood, but it continued relentlessly uphill. Her relief at finally seeing the figure just at the top of the hill was huge. She was going to call out, to let him know she was there. But something stopped her. What? It certainly was Alex. She'd recognize that stance anywhere. Why had she hesitated? Then she saw that he turned suddenly to look behind him. She waited, watching to see what he'd heard. She was standing in the darkest shadow of a high bank of trees. Something was not right. In the next moment, another man came from somewhere behind Alex. He was tall, wearing a long coat, his hat pulled low. She felt as if she were watching a shadow play. She had the idea that his hands were in his pockets. He said something she couldn't hear. Perhaps this was why Alex wanted to meet her. They were to meet this other man? But that was... She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Why was he here? Horror froze her. The tall man burst forward suddenly, and in the next instant the two of them were grappling, moving toward the cliff edge. Alex was struggling, his back to the sea, and then he was falling backward, his arms flailing. He dropped like a stone, casually tossed by a schoolboy, his scream filling the air. How long did she cower in the dark, shivering with terror and shock? She could not take her eyes off the man who had pushed Alex Tremaine to his death. He stepped back from the cliff and shrugged as if to adjust his coat on his shoulders. And then he turned and walked a few paces towards where she was hiding. He looked into the dark of the wood as if he were expecting someone. It took a cold moment to realize that she was the one he was waiting for. How had he found out? She looked hastily back the way she'd come, wondering if she could make her way back down. And when she turned again, the man was calmly lighting a cigarette. His lighter flipped open, the bobbing flame illuminating his face for the briefest second. He stood, looking out to sea for a few moments, nonchalant, as if he had not just thrown a man to his death. Suddenly he turned, looking into the darkness behind him, and called out, "Diana, I know you're here somewhere. I know what you took. I will find you, and I will kill you."
That was terrific, Iona. I'm curious. We both write historical fiction, and I'm curious, why are you drawn to this particular time period?
I don't really know, except I sort of started writing it, and then there I was writing it. I think it's a lot to do with the fact that my parents are from that time. I think a lot of us my age have parents from that generation. And my mother herself engaged in espionage, and so it was kind of an attractive thing. My grandfather was a spy, and his two brothers both worked for MI6 as well. So I think it was just too tempting to just take it there.
That's that's a lot of reason to write from that time period. And I write from that time period because of my parents, and that's just so interesting. It's terrific. Thank you so much.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.